When the letter first arrived, I thought it was just another condolence card. The envelope was made of thick, cream-colored paper, embossed with the logo of a downtown law firm. Inside, the words were barely legible, but I understood enough to realize that my world was about to be turned upside down once again. Aunt Eleanor's will was to be read, scheduled for Tuesday at 10 a.m. In the days leading up to it, I'd walked through the corridors of her beach house in a daze. The house still smelled of sea salt and polished wood, the scent of her life lingering. I couldn't separate the grief from the weight of responsibility that pressed upon me. She'd been meticulous about everything: rules, business, reputation. I knew what she was leaving behind would be no small thing. On the morning of the will reading, I wore a dark blue suit she would have liked. The rigidity of downtown offices had always bothered me, but I acted as she had taught me: chin up, step steady. Gerald Thompson, her lawyer of 3 decades, greeted me with a firm handshake and a kind look. He offered his condolences again before gesturing for me to sit in a chair in his wood-paneled office. I folded my hands on my knees, resting them on the polished armrests. I was ready to hear the details of the estate, the beach house, the company shares, and perhaps a trust account I hadn't even known about. I wasn't prepared for the sudden slam of the door behind me. I turned around, and time seemed to break. 2 people stood in the doorway. My father, heavier than I could remember, his dark hair now streaked with gray. My mother, thinner with sunken eyes but a gentle smile. 16 years of silence vanished in that moment. "Clara, look at you, you've grown up," my mother said in a soft voice, as if she had just tucked me in last night. I couldn't move. The air thinned until every breath stung my lungs. My father raised his hand and gave a half-hearted wave. "We are your executors," he said, as if the words were absolute truth. Thompson looked up from his file, his expression enigmatic. My parents sat opposite me, their smiles forced as if prearranged. The will hadn't been read yet, but the room was already charged with something far more serious than mere papers. My mother bent over the table before I could reply. She wrapped her thin but determined arms around me, and I froze. The scent of her perfume, sharp, floral, strangely familiar, filled the air, and I felt as if the years were rushing backward in a rush I didn't want. When she moved away, her hands remained on my shoulders, her eyes fixed on my face, as if she had the right to study me. "You look so much like Eleanor now," she whispered, her smile trembling. My father sat beside her, his hand resting deliberately on the table. He said in a low voice, carrying a weight I wasn't sure was regret or pretense, "We've been trying to find you. 16 years is a long time, but we're here now." I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. My chest burned with anger. Yet deep down, there was a dangerous pull, an old longing for my parents, to whom I had once begged to come home. "We are your guardians," my mother repeated in a softer voice this time, as if the words themselves were capable of erasing the years. "All we want is to help." Across the desk, Thompson cleared his throat. He closed the file in front of him with meticulous precision. "Perhaps we should postpone these guardianship matters for later," he said quietly. "There are legal documents that need to be reviewed before we go into any further details." His sudden composure reassured me more than I had expected. My parents exchanged glances, a hint of tension between them, before my father nodded stiffly. Thompson stood up and said, "Let's take a short break now. We'll reconvene as soon as I have the necessary records." The meeting descended into murmurs and gestures, but I remained seated, gripping the armrests of my chair tightly. My parents' return was no longer a figment of my imagination. It had become a reality fraught with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Yet, despite all logic, a part of me still yearned to know why they had left. I was 12 years old on the morning my world collapsed. The cold October air seeped through the thin walls of the apartment, and I woke shivering, waiting for my mother's knock, that call that always roused me from sleep. But it never came. The apartment was eerily quiet, heavy with an emptiness I couldn't initially define. I walked lightly into the hall, still in my socks, and saw that their bedroom door was wide open. My mother never left it open in her difficult days. She preferred the darkness. The cupboard was almost empty. The hangers swayed slightly as if they had just been moved. The drawers were open. Nothing remained but scattered socks and folded receipts. On the kitchen table, there was a single piece of paper. Her handwriting was small and rushed. "Clarala, we can continue with this. Eleanor will take care of you. We're sorry about that 16 words to end childhood." I read it over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood. I called my mother's phone until the battery died. My father's line was already down. I waited by the window all day, convinced they would return, shyly, ready to explain. Night fell, and I curled up on the sofa with my dry cereal, listening intently for footsteps that never came. On the second day, the landlord banged on the door demanding the rent. I stammered out lies about my parents being gone, but his eyes narrowed with suspicion. He muttered something about contacting social services. My heart pounded as I closed the door behind him. On the third day, the silence became unbearably heavy. I called the school counselor, my voice trembling as I tried to explain. Within hours, a woman from Child Protective Services arrived. Miss Hartwell, with her calm voice and kind eyes, gently told me that my parents had left for good. That night, I packed what I could into a single suitcase, waiting for my aunt, whom I barely knew, to take me away. When Eleanor arrived, her face impassive, I realized my old life was over. The road to Aunt Eleanor's house felt endless. It wound like a thread, pulling me away from everything I knew. When we arrived, the house stood proudly on the horizon, a grand beachfront property with windows that seemed to watch me as I stepped out of the car. Eleanor didn't hug me or offer words of comfort. She simply said, "Choosing what you could carry was a wise decision. The rest can be arranged later." Inside, order was blatant. Not a single pillow was out of place, not a single book tilted. I walked behind her, afraid my footsteps might even scratch the polished floors. That first night, she gave me a list. Wake up at 7, have breakfast on time, make the beds before leaving the rooms, practice the piano for an hour every day, and do homework at the desk. Her voice was brief but calm, and there was no doubt she expected these rules to be more than mere suggestions. I tried to test her resolve. I stayed in bed after breakfast, skipped practice, and pretended my homework was done when it wasn't. Part of me hoped she'd explode, threaten to fire me, prove that even grown-ups eventually leave. But she responded with consequences so subtle they hurt more than her anger. Late for breakfast? The kitchen was locked, and I'd have to wait until lunch. Not finish my homework? All plans were canceled until I'd completed every single page. Yet she never raised her voice, never once hinted that I was a burden she didn't want. On the contrary, her composure bothered me more than the punishment. When I pressed her, she offered no resistance. She stood her ground, as solid as a wall. There were rare, fleeting moments when the harshness of her mask melted away. The night I wept over an old photograph of my parents, she sat silently beside me, handing me a tissue until my tears dried. She didn't call it love, and I didn't dare. But something about her presence began to give me a sense of stability, even security. And so, under the watchful eye of her rules, I began to transform into someone else, even though I didn't yet know who I was. At first, Westfield Academy felt like a punishment disguised as an opportunity. The corridors were filled with polished shoes and confident, practiced voices, while I stumbled through classrooms that assumed I was years old. My classmates carried new textbooks, mine were secondhand. They talked about ski trips and summers in Europe, while my memories were filled with broken-down cars and my father disappearing to weekend games. I spent nights at my desk, deep in geometry problems and Latin translations, determined not to let the cracks show. Yet failure continued to haunt me. My first semester results were riddled with red marks, which I couldn't bear. I wanted to quit, to scream at Eleanor that I didn't belong in her world. Eleanor listened calmly as I seethed with anger, her face unreadable. When I finished, she said simply, "Your circumstances aren't your choice, but what you do with them is." I felt the harshness of her bluntness, but at the same time, it gave me strength. I used a fellow teacher's tutoring allowances, formed study groups, and began to work my way up to the top. By my third year, my name appeared on the honor roll. By my final year, the teachers no longer saw me as a disadvantage under Eleanor Hughes. Meanwhile, she continued her intensive business administration classes. On weekends, she would take me to meetings and whisper notes to me. Notice who gives up first. Observe whose expression changes when the numbers are mentioned. I thought she was molding me into something I had never asked for, and resentment was simmering beneath my progress. Our disagreements reached their peak during university application period. I wanted a public university close to my friends, while she insisted on higher aspirations. One night I exclaimed, "I never asked to be your project." Her gaze softened, but her voice remained calm. "And I never asked to be your guardian. Yet here we are. I'm trying to give you what your parents could never give you, more choices." For the first time, she told me about my father's mathematical genius, how he could have gone to college but hadn't. His bitterness, she said, had driven him to gamble and seek shortcuts. "I won't let you ruin yourself the same way." This statement softened my anger. It didn't erase her cruelty, but it gave it meaning. When my acceptance letter from Northwestern University arrived, I realized she wasn't trying to mold me into her image. She was opening a door I hadn't dared to knock on. The diagnosis came in early spring, just as the garden outside was beginning to regain its color. Pancreatic cancer. The words sounded medical, almost mundane, until the doctor's voice softened and the truth dawned on me. There would be no cure, only management, and even that would be short-lived. Eleanor listened intently. She nodded, asked about treatment dates, and thanked the doctor as if he had given her a weather forecast rather than a judgment. I sat frozen in the corner of the room, my chest so tight I couldn't breathe. From that day on, our roles reversed. I became the one setting the rules, taking medication at specific times, meticulously planning meals, and scheduling and keeping appointments. She acquiesced without complaint, which bothered me even more than her illness. For years, she had demanded punctuality from me, and now she seemed relieved that I was the one demanding it of her. The house grew quieter as she weakened. Paperwork replaced her commanding presence at meetings, and then even that faded. I watched her, the strong, resilient woman she had once been, shrink into mere faint lines beneath the covers. But in those months, something else emerged. Her voice softened, and the silence between us became friendly instead of rigid. One evening, as I was helping her lie down in bed, she gripped my hand with unexpected force. Her eyes, faint but steady, met mine. She whispered, "You were the daughter I never allowed myself to have. Adopting you was the best decision I ever made." I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that streamed down her face. I had waited years to hear words like these, and now they came just when time was running out. She passed away 8 months later. The house, which had once resonated with her footsteps and her rules, now felt empty. I wandered through every room, touching the furniture she had chosen, the piano she had insisted I practice, the desk she had urged me to work harder on. Grief and responsibility overwhelmed me, one burdened by the loss, the other demanding that I carry on with what she had left behind. I buried her knowing that her presence would forever mark my life. Then came the message summoning me to hear her will. The room held its breath as Gerald Thompson adjusted his glasses and began to read. His voice was calm and steady, each word falling like a stone in water. To my niece, Clara Whitford, I bequeath my entire estate, including, but not limited to, the property in Sea Beach, all shares of Hughes Home Collections, and liquid assets with a combined value of $2.5 million. I sat frozen, the numbers fading before me, both unreal and heavy. My hands trembled on the armrests, not with greed or triumph, but with the crushing reminder that she was truly gone. And this was all that remained of her life. Across the table, my parents leaned forward, their smiles fading. My father cleared his throat and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson. We, as her legal guardians, must have our own arrangements. It is our responsibility to guide our daughter in such serious matters." The word girl, I felt a sting. My mother nodded quickly, placing her hand over mine as if the past 16 years had never happened. "She's young. It would be hard on anyone. That's why we're here." I pulled my hand back, my heart pounding in my ears. Part of me wanted to stand up and shout, to remind them that they had lost any right to claim me. But another part, that 12-year-old boy waiting by the window, hesitated, searching their faces for something real beneath those forced smiles. Thompson closed the file very carefully. "We will put this discussion on hold for now. Matters of guardianship and administration require a full review of the documents, which I will have ready by tomorrow. Until then, no decisions will be made." My parents exchanged a fleeting glance, the lingering resentment quickly giving way to polite gestures. I remained silent, anger wrestling with doubt within me. They had returned just as luck had returned, yet a dangerous part of me wondered if this was my chance to hear the answers I had longed for years. That night, I agreed to meet them for dinner. It was one of Eleanor's favorite restaurants, with its polished wood and understated elegance. I had chosen it deliberately, hoping its formal atmosphere would help me control my emotions. My parents were already seated when I arrived, and my father quickly got up to bring me a chair, while my mother smiled as if this meeting had been anticipated for years. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation oscillated between casual remarks and awkward silences. They asked me about my studies, my work, and my life with Eleanor. I answered briefly, watching them, trying to connect the faces sitting on the other side of the table with those etched in my childhood memory. Finally, my mother's eyes filled with tears. "We owe you the truth," she said in a trembling voice. "When we left, we were devastated. Your father's gambling had drained everything, and I was sinking into depression. We convinced ourselves that you would be safer with Eleanor. She had money, stability, and a future that we couldn't provide for you." My father nodded as he looked down at his plate. "That was cheese. I've been in recovery for 8 years now. Your mother's mother also found help. We thought about asking for help many times, but shame kept us from speaking up." The pain in my chest intensified. For a moment, I almost believed them. I wanted to. I wanted the years of silence to have a reason other than neglect. But the conversation suddenly changed. My father raised his glass, his tone softening. "Of course, our situation is stable now. But it hasn't been easy. The mortgage payment for our apartment, $70,000, is still a burden. And your mother's medical bills." His voice fell silent, waiting. My mother reached out and gripped me tightly. "We're not asking for much. Just a little help to get better. You have so much now, Clara. This help will mean everything to us." The warmth within me faded, leaving only clarity. Their regrets easily transformed into demands. Their apologies mingled with numbers. I withdrew my hand, keeping my voice calm. "I need time to think." I left them on the table, and the bitterness was more intense than the food I had barely touched. And I went out into the night, knowing that Eleanor's letter was waiting for me in Thompson's office. The following afternoon, Thompson's office seemed busier than ever. My parents were already there, their lawyer sitting beside them. But Thompson ignored this pretense and turned directly to me. From a closed drawer, he produced a thick file and a sealed envelope bearing my name in Eleanor's fine handwriting. "This one was left to be read in exactly these kinds of circumstances," he said, pushing her forward. My fingers trembled as I opened the seal. Eleanor's voice seemed to emanate from the page, clear and steady even in the ink. She wrote about the first months after she took me in, how my father demanded $50,000 in exchange for not challenging the conservatorship, and how, years later, my mother claimed she needed the money for cancer treatments that didn't even exist. Every attempt was documented, investigated, and refuted. Tears welled in my eyes, but I forced myself to continue reading. The letter revealed a truth I'd never known. At 16, Eleanor had legally adopted me. She'd chosen not to change my name, hoping I'd one day reconcile with my parents. But legally, I'd been hers ever since. "Family," she wrote, "this is built through ongoing care, not through DNA. Blood may connect us, but it doesn't guarantee it." I folded the letter slowly, feeling its weight settle deep inside me. The glimmer of hope I'd carried since childhood, that my parents would return out of love, not self-interest, was suddenly extinguished. When I looked up, my parents were staring at me, their faces pale, their lawyer whispering urgently in their ears. Thompson closed the file for good. "It seems to be settled," he said. At that moment, I realized that the final confrontation could no longer be postponed. They arrived at the beach house at dusk, their rental car rattling on the gravel road, as if they had the right to arrive unannounced. I opened the door just enough to block their path. But my mother slipped past me, her eyes gazing longingly at the high ceilings and the ocean view. My father followed, his voice already raised. "You can't cut us out, Clara. We're still your parents," he said, his tone sharp and filled with anger rather than love. I stood my ground. "You abandoned me." Eleanor raised me. She is my mother. For a moment, silence fell between us, broken only by the roar of the waves outside. Then the threats began. Rumors they might spread, stories they might tell, their voices rising in despair. I didn't move. Thompson had everything arranged, from security orders to surveillance cameras. Within minutes, 2 officers appeared at the door, their presence transforming my parents' anger into a retreat masked by resentment as a police patrol car escorted them away. I felt something settle inside me. The girl who had waited for their return by the window was gone. What remained was the woman Eleanor had molded, steadfast, resolute, refusing to be associated with those who had abandoned me. Months later, the paperwork was signed, establishing the Hughes Foundation for Neglected Children. With every scholarship awarded, every house built, I felt Eleanor's presence beside me. She gave me more than just wealth. She gave me a roadmap to become the person I was meant to be. I will spend the rest of my life honoring that gift.
अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं, ये जो दिन सहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं, तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा बेसर्द लगता है, दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दूर भरता है। अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं, ये जो दिन सुहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं, तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा सर्द लगता है, दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दूर भरता है। मेरे साए भी मुझसे अब जुदा होने को कहते हैं, तुझे खोने की राहों में ये आंसू बहने लगते हैं। कहाँ जाऊँ कहाँ ढूंढूं मेरा वो साजो सामा, तो मेरी हर एक तमन्ना तू, मेरी रूह का मका तू, लकीरों में नहीं लिखा जो तुमने ख्वाब देखा था, वफा की इस कहानी में से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ होगा, मगर खामोश है दुनिया, कहाँ मेरा जहाँ होगा। बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी बेबसी की सूरत, मुझे है आज भी तेरी वफा की सख्त जरूरत। साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर, साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर,